Breath of Fire 3 released in the United States in 1998. It marked the series' first foray into the world of 3D graphics, courtesy of the Sony PlayStation. Releasing just 1 year after Final Fantasy VII, a game that would go on to become one of the most iconic RPGs of all time, meant Breath of Fire 3 was up against some pretty tough competition. Nevertheless, the series' third installment carved out a place for itself, proving that bigger is not always better. Today, I celebrate that memory by looking back on a true classic. This review will generalize whenever possible, but it does contain some spoilers. With that said, let's get right into my pointless review of Breath of Fire 3. Breath of Fire 3 puts us in the shoes of a blue-haired protagonist named Ryu. What makes Ryu unique isn't just his hair color, but his ability to transform into a dragon. When his resting place in the Dawn of Mines is disturbed by workers, Ryu, already in dragon form, is forced to fight for his life, killing some of the miners in the process. However, it's not long before he is subdued and placed in a cage to be transported off-site. Ryu's story as a boy begins after he succeeds in knocking the cage free, where it tumbles to the forest below. Breath of Fire 3 has a story that dabbles in very mature themes for a game carrying a teen rating. Ryu quickly finds himself thrust into a harsh world where violence is a regular give and take. When two thugs named Balio and Sunder make an attempt at their lives, Ryu, Rei, and Teepo become separated. Shortly thereafter, Ryu is rescued by a young girl named Nina, the Princess of Windia. The two children work in tandem to survive the violent efforts of their pursuers. Along the way, Ryu and Nina befriend the memorable scientist Momo and her little robot companion Honey, as well as Pico, a sapling with a divine secret. Balio and Sunder eventually catch up to the group and, by holding one of them hostage, force Ryu and the others to participate in a tournament. When the victor, Gar, steps in to claim the children as his prize, the cogs of fate are finally allowed to turn. Gar, already very familiar with Ryu and his power, suggests that Ryu follow him to the east, to Angel Tower. The events at Angel Tower don't go quite as planned, and years pass before Gar is able to track Ryu to the Dawn of Mines, where he is once again wandering in dragon form. Ryu, now much older, agrees once again to travel with Gar to Angel Tower, this time for answers. The road east quickly reunites old friends. One unexpected reunion occurs early on when Ryu is suddenly reunited with Rei, his childhood friend long believed to be dead. When God won't meet with Gar at Angel Tower, the group has no choice but to travel far to the north. Barring entrance to this old world is the treacherous Outer Sea. Ryu and his friends have to capture the Black Ship, a sort of lost ark on autopilot, if they hope to brave this barrier. Awaiting them on the other side is an equally vast and unforgivable desert. Without a means to part the wasteland, Ryu and his friends must cross on foot. What they find on the other side is unlike anything they've ever seen. It's here that Ryu must make difficult decisions in search of the answers he seeks. Still, Ryu is never alone. Breath of Fire 3 is a turn-based isometric RPG. You move about via the world map, entering locations with a single button press whenever prompted. In many locations of the game, random battles can occur. A battle is won by attacking, defending, using items, and/or expending AP to use techniques. A fifth command is available, called Examine, which forfeits that particular character's turn in order to observe an enemy in hopes to learn a skill that they use. By winning battles, the player is awarded EXP, used for leveling up, Zenny, used for buying stuff, and occasionally items and even equipment. Take care not to finish a battle while anyone's HP is at 0, or else that character's maximum HP will be temporarily reduced. Outside a battle, the player will want to keep an eye out for treasure. Breath of Fire 3 is certainly a game that rewards the player with powerful weapons and armor for exploring those hard-to-reach places. Don't forget to equip this newfound loot via the menu. However, bear in mind that bigger is not necessarily always better. Each piece of equipment in Breath of Fire 3 has a weight rating, so a sword that drastically raises your attack power might drastically reduce your agility. Don't fret when it comes to accessories though. These items weigh nothing, can ward off status effects or absorb elemental damage, and unlike equipment, can be used by any of your characters. Last but not least, keep an eye peeled for giant blocks of Chrism ore, as these contain additional genes for Ryu, bolstering the dragon combinations available to you via Ryu's Ascension technique. That said, plenty of areas are combat-free, with most of them being towns. While in town, the player has ample opportunity to gather information by talking to NPCs, purchase items and equipment from stores, get inoculated against various elements and status effects at the pharmacy, or rest and save your game at an inn. inns restore any harm done to a character's maximum HP. One town in particular where you'll be spending a decent amount of your time is the Fairy Village. It's here that you can build your own economy of sorts. While the village is entirely optional, it is in your best interest to help it grow, as it's the only way to obtain certain items like one of the game's best fishing poles. Of course, when you really want to get away from it all, there's just no substitute for good old fishing. Accessible via the world map, you can fish wherever you see them hopping up out of the water. All you need is a pole and lure. The poles vary by cast distance and strength of line. Some lures sink, others float, and each one attracts its own fish. The player can perform various rhythm techniques to make their lure even more appealing to fish. All of these techniques are outlined in the game's own fishing guide. Fish perform various functions as consumables, but the main reason for catching fish is to trade them. The Manillo trader, caught by fishing with a coin, will trade you many things that cannot be purchased with money. He often has really good items that will benefit you greatly. He's hard to miss, just look for the fish with arms and legs, and easy to catch. Another thing you want to keep an eye out for are masters. Masters bestow not only additional techniques upon their apprentices, but also additional stats. However, the stats come at a cost, so beware. Some masters are easier to learn from than others, but most will tell you what they want you to do before they take you under their wing. And when it's time to save and quit, go ahead and set up camp on the world map. Use Skillink to swap those skills learned using the examine command. Check out the details on masters if you want to see what stats they influence, and do not be afraid to chat with your party members if you need a refresher on what it is that you're supposed to do next. Breath of Fire 3 is a very leveled and concise experience. One of my favorite aspects of the game is the dialogue. The conversations are organic, yet succinct. No idling for 15 minutes while a party member forces you to listen to their opinion on so-and-so being a womanizer, pervert, bad cook, loud sleeper, good with a sword, bad with a sword, etc. None of those annoying Japanese conversation coasters made it into this game, and for that, I am grateful. That said, the characters don't speak too matter-of-factly either. Instead, the conversation is perfectly balanced between idle talk that people would actually engage in, and conversation that moves the plot along. In other words, Breath of Fire 3 is almost entirely without a boring moment. The only downsides are the occasional typo, and a certain reluctance for punctuation. Quite possibly the game's one and only egregious error occurs closer to its conclusion when you're given directions on how to cross the Desert of Death. Horus, the man who provides the directions, includes within them that the player must head east once he or she reaches a certain point within the desert. Horus quite kindly includes a copy of these directions and places them inside your tent, should you ever need to reaffirm yourself of your heading. However, the directions in the tent state that the player must travel west, not east. Should you follow the directions written in Horus's note, you'll wind up going the wrong way. Fortunately, this small but frustrating mistake does not mar the experience of anything up to or beyond this point. One example of consistency throughout would be Breath of Fire 3's humble soundtrack. Every place you go has a particular mood, perfectly communicated to you by its audible counterpart. The battle theme is tailored so appropriately that it might as well be half of what makes combat enjoyable. Having something good to tap your foot to while you watch the fights play out fills in those gaps where your thumbs and thoughts are at a standstill. Despite being a turn-based game, battles in Breath of Fire 3 are rather fast-paced. That said, it's never too soon when that battle music kicks back on. As far as the sights go, Breath of Fire 3 sticks to the warmer climates. As the game opens, winter is already waning to a hopeful spring. For the majority of the game, it's green grass, blue waters, bubbling volcanoes, sandy shores, and stifling deserts. Still, the environments have tons of personality even when they transition from the peaceful forests to the drab skeletons of ancient industry. On top of all these 3D environments are many 2D sprites, our heroes included. Breath of Fire 3 didn't pioneer this concept, but it certainly is a standout art form here. No matter where you go in Breath of Fire 3, the camera always looks down on you from the same angle. You can adjust it if you need to get a different look at something, but the degree at which you can do so adheres to a limit. The camera itself can almost be viewed as a metaphor for the entirety of Breath of Fire 3. It's not a complicated game, but it does house many secrets for those who are willing to look for them. One example provided to the player early on reveals the Tarman's aversion to frost damage. Using this element against Tarman doesn't just paralyze him, but also negates his resistance to physical attacks, turning this otherwise sturdy opponent into a pushover. However, this knowledge is merely intended to whet your appetite. You'll have to discover the weaknesses of future opponents on your own. Now, fortunately, you don't need to exploit enemy behavior to complete or enjoy Breath of Fire 3. It's just one of those things that, once you understand it, it adds another flavor to the game. The same could be said of the game's Dragon Gene system for Ryu. You really just have to experiment with it to figure it out. It's that reticence to reveal secrets that keeps Breath of Fire 3's replay value high, a game you can always learn something new about, even 20 years later. The word apogee, among other things, can mean the farthest or highest point, a culmination. In my early teens, when I first played Breath of Fire 3, I had no idea what apogee meant. The Rapala Lighthouse, where this word is incorporated into a puzzle, had me burning through more Chrism ore than I care to admit. What's more is that it wasn't so easy to look things up back in the late 90s. The internet was still more of a luxury back then versus the commonplace utility it's become today, meaning my only option was to look in an actual dictionary. In the end, I think I just wound up guessing my way to success. Still, I don't look back on that moment of frustration with anything but humility. The Rapala Lighthouse will always be the game's most poignant moment for me, the only game to ever stop me in my tracks with a word. Through sheer coincidence, that word would go on to be something that I'd use to describe the entirety of Breath of Fire 3. It stands amongst the best of its series and represents the very apogee of the classic RPG. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next Pointless Review.